Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shankari Goldstein, host of the Inspiring Mind series for the Mind and Life Institute. I'm so glad that you could join us for our episode today on mindfulness approaches to addiction and recovery. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the ancestral and unceded land of the Monacan Indian Nation, who have lived in Central Virginia for over 10,000 years. We share this message to bring awareness and honor the presence of all Indigenous peoples and the need for change in colonial settler societies. At Mind and Life, we continue to find ways to cultivate relationships with our global majority and disenfranchised communities, as well as building trust and taking action toward healing and repair. Please share where you're tuning in from and whose territory you reside on in the chat so that we can connect together as a virtual community and acknowledge the ancestors who are watching over us today. For those of you who are new to Mind and Life, we believe that many of today's problems, from growing mental health concerns to social and racial injustice to the climate crisis, originate in the human mind. Building on our 35-year legacy, we explore the potential of the mind to solve them. Each episode of Inspiring Minds explores solutions to real-world issues through the lens of research and contemplative wisdom. In September, we looked at how youth experiencing homelessness and climate activists are both benefiting from Christian contemplative traditions. Today, we'll explore how mindfulness and embodied practices are being employed as part of an integrative approach to addiction and recovery. We'll learn about the evidence base that emerged to support this work and what needs to happen next. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank Mind and Life supporters for their generosity, as well as all of you who contributed during the registration process to this program. Your generosity is deeply appreciated. We're going to open our episode with a contemplative arts offering from Jeffrey Menon. Jeffrey shares his music directly from the heart and the spirit. His musical meditation offerings are pure improvisations. He began playing the piano at the age of 3, and he studied classical music from kindergarten through law school, while playing in various rock bands and jazz ensembles along the way. He's performed with some of my all-time favorites, including meeting Buddy Miles down by the river and exploring what it means to be a simple man with Charlie Daniels, plus collaborations with other musical icons. We hope you enjoy this illuminating and joyful experience. Joining us from his home in New York City today, please welcome Jeffrey Menon.
Hi, everybody. I'm happy to be here. I would like to thank the people at Mind and Life for inviting me to participate today. As Shankari said, the music I play is in the moment. It's something that comes from the moment we're in, and in this case, I think the initial piece I'm going to play is directed toward opening our hearts. So I hope you enjoy. Trying to change one setting on my computer, which is not working.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey, for that inspiring piece. And we really look forward to you coming back and joining us on this chat shortly. Thank you. So I'd like to introduce our two speakers. First, we have Durga Leela, who is an Ayurveda practitioner, a yoga therapist, and the founder of Yoga of Recovery, a comprehensive program that integrates Ayurveda and yoga with recovery tools for all those affected by addiction and self-destructive behaviors. She teaches a holistic approach to recovery, integrating mind, body, and spirit. She overcame her own struggles with addiction and has been a grateful member of 12-step fellowships for over 21 years. She's currently working on a book on Ayurveda and addiction, and we really are grateful that you were able to join us today, Durga.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's great, great to be here.
Joining Durga in this rich conversation is Dr. Eric Garland. Eric is the Distinguished Endowed Chair in Research and Distinguished Professor in the University of Utah College of Social Work and Director of the Center on Mindfulness and Integrative Health Intervention Development, CMIND. As a principal investigator or co-investigator, Eric has published over 185 scientific articles and received more than 60 million in research grants to develop and test therapies for addiction, stress, and pain, including mindfulness-oriented recovery enhancement or more. In a bibliometric analysis published in 2021, Eric was found to be the most prolific author of research on mindfulness in the world. Wow. Thank you for joining us, Eric. Thank you both for taking the time to join us today. I have no doubt this is going to be an incredible conversation. And we're going to have time towards the end of our group conversation for 1 to 2 public questions from our audience to come in and join us live. So while we're talking with our 3 speakers today, just hold those questions and we'll invite you at the end to come up and chat with our guests. So Durga and Eric, I'd love to begin with asking, what prompted each of you to pursue the work that you're doing now? And Durga, perhaps you can begin just by sharing a short snippet of your personal journey into this exciting work first for us.
Yes, thank you, Shankari. I like the phrase, you teach what you need to learn. And so I have been teaching for many years this integration of Ayurveda and yoga because it's really what I need in my life. And it was the necessity. So I am from Scotland, but I was originally born in New Jersey, and my father died there, and my mother took all 5 of her children home. And unfortunately, she experienced alcoholism. So I was raised with the addiction. I disliked it intensely. I tried to run away from it. I couldn't. Wherever I went, there it was within me. So when my mother passed, I got into recovery. And by that time, I'd left London, where I had a corporate career. I had been fired from my job, and I was in Lake Tahoe. And my entrance into recovery was through the 12-step program. Now, in London, I had practiced Hatha yoga before it was trendy. And here I was in Lake Tahoe trying to start a new life. And what I really was up against a year or 18 months into my sobriety in a 12-step program and in therapy, and I'm going to phrase it very briefly, I had the hunger that food wouldn't take away, and I had the tiredness that sleep wouldn't remove. So I had a lot of great metabolic disrepair from smoking and drinking and doing drugs. And I had a spiritual awakening and a spiritual emergence in the 12-step program, but I really needed to bring the body to that. And so therefore I was gifted Ayurveda, and it has been with me ever since. And it's an honor to share it.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that personal little bit of your journey. Eric, is there a story, a personal story that stands out that you'd like to share about what inspired you to step into this field of work and research?
Yes, thank you, Shankari. And it's such a joy to be here with all of you. And thanks, Durga, for your beautiful story. I think really my movement into this field came out of a personal spiritual emergence as well, at a fairly early age, around the age of 18. And that helped me to understand the fundamental power of consciousness in the ability to heal from adversity in life. And so that insight really motivated all the work that flowed forth from that point, from my clinical work as a psychotherapist, working with people struggling with addiction and mental health problems and physical pain. And then my research program, which really expanded upon my clinical work and has really been focused over the past decade plus, 15 years, on the study of addiction, which to me is really, it's a science that cuts right to the heart of some of the most fundamental questions in human existence, like the question of fate versus free will, for example. So I think really my own personal experience, and this I think is important for the conversation, learning that I had an innate capacity to use my own consciousness to help create a healing force in myself and others, I think was one of the things that helped protect me from not becoming addicted, because I certainly had plenty of friends who went by the wayside. And so that's been a really important lesson for me over the years, and something that I want to try to bring to others.
So let's stay there, Eric. You've truly spent years researching and refining what would become the mindfulness-oriented recovery enhancement, or MORE program, with initial support from Mind and Life. Can you tell us a little bit more about that work?
Oh, I'd love to.
More about more.
When you have a therapy called MORE, the puns never end. There's always more and more. Yeah, so MORE is based on a neuroscientific model of addiction. And the fundamental idea of this model is that addiction is a manifestation of normal human learning processes gone awry. So we become addicted in the same way that we develop any other habit. When we do a behavior over and over again, and that behavior is reinforced either by the relief of emotional pain, or by the power of the addictive behavior to produce pleasure and a sense of satisfaction, that behavior becomes reinforced and entrenched as an automatic habit. And as the addictive cycle progresses, there are some changes that happen in the brain that are really important, I think, to understand how to help people recover from addiction. So the first change is that the brain becomes increasingly sensitive to drug-related cues, as well as physical and emotional pain. But at the same time, there are changes that occur in the reward circuitry of the brain, such that the person becomes less able to extract a healthy sense of pleasure, meaning, and joy out of everyday life. And that drives them to take higher and higher doses of the drug just to feel okay. So given this neuroscientific model, I developed the mindfulness-oriented recovery enhancement program to address these issues, and by integrating mindfulness meditation training with two other very important techniques. One being training in reappraisal, which is the process of reframing life adversity and seeing that adversity as a source of learning or potential opportunity for psychological growth. And the other component of MORE that makes it quite unique is the use of mindfulness to savor natural, healthy pleasure, to amplify natural, healthy pleasure, and to be able to extract a deeper sense of joy and meaning in the face of our everyday life. And that's really important, we believe, and also the data shows, in remediating the reward deficit that I just talked to you about a moment before in discussing the neuroscientific model of addiction. So MORE is a group therapy. It's typically delivered as a group therapy over 8 weekly sessions. And we've studied this group therapy format of MORE now for more than a decade. And we've conducted multiple clinical trials that have been funded by the National Institutes of Health, the Department of Defense, and other federal agencies. And most of the work that I've done is focused on MORE as a treatment for opioid misuse, as well as the comorbidities that come along with it, like physical pain and emotional distress. And in trials involving about 500 patients, we found that MORE significantly decreases opioid misuse, with effects lasting 9 months after the end of the 8-week therapy. we found that more actually decreased opioid misuse by 46%. And at the same time, more significantly decreases physical pain intensity and reduces depression and PTSD and other forms of emotional suffering. But in addition to the effects of more on reducing these really important symptoms, more also seems to increase positive psychological health. So more increases positive emotions and the sense of meaning in life. And these effects also last 9 months after the end of the treatment. That's as long as we followed people. So we've been wanting to really understand, how is more helping people to change? How is it producing these therapeutic outcomes in people struggling from addiction? And to answer that question, we use neuroscience to really dig in and understand how more is changing the brain and the body. And we found using well-validated tasks from neuroscience that more decreases physiological responsivity to drug cues. So after 8 weeks of mindfulness training with more, the patient's brains and bodies become less sensitive to drug-related cues. And at the same time, the brain and the body becomes more sensitive to natural, healthy pleasure. And what's been really amazing is that the more sensitive the person becomes to natural, healthy pleasure, the less craving they feel for the drug, and the less they actually misuse the drug, suggesting that more is remediating and restructuring the reward deficit in addiction. But there's one other finding I want to tell you about, and then I'll be done here, and that is the real frontier here in this work is paying attention to a construct which I think really has not received enough attention in the scientific literature, and that is the notion that accessing self-transcendent experiences can actually be a healing force. And so we have documented evidence that when people with addiction go through the mindfulness-oriented recovery enhancement program, they have a greater sense of oneness with the world around them, a greater sense of connectedness with something beyond themselves. And the more connected they feel to the world around them, the greater the sense of oneness, the greater alleviation of symptoms they experience. So to me, that's just one of the most exciting findings that I've ever encountered in my career. And we have actually brain biomarkers of this self-transcendent response. But I think what's most important for the audience to understand is that we can use mindfulness and contemplative practices to cultivate states of self-transcendence, to go beyond our limited sense of self, our limited egos, and that in connecting with the world around us, it actually is a healing force that can potentially reverse the process of addiction. So I'll stop there. I'm sure there's more to discuss.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. And I hope we can get more into the self-transcendence later on in the conversation with Durga. So if for our viewers, if you'd like to learn more, we're going to drop a link in the comments. This is Eric's recently published work in Science Advances. I think it'll be really, really helpful for our audience that is viewing live with us right now to kind of be able to follow along. Thank you so much. And Durga, so much of Eric's research, it led me to think about yogic and ayurvedic philosophy, in particular, how it's the gunas at work. You've described the gunas as healing states for your whole life. So maybe perhaps you can define some of these terms for our audience that are new to Ayurveda and yoga, and how yoga of recovery draws upon these teachings and disciplines to help people overcome self-destructive and addictive tendencies.
Thank you, Shankari, and beautiful to hear all that, Eric. I really am happy to hear all the research that's going on. I'm always interested in the self-transcendence piece, because in some sense, it's what we're known for in yoga. We start from that philosophical construct to offer meaning and purpose in life through that angle, which is the top-down neurocognitive view. So when we come into that aspect, we're looking at what we call the three gunas. And those are really states of like all the primordial states of being of the whole manifest universe. So they represent matter, energy, and intelligence. And when in Ayurveda we want to assess a person's mindset, we tend to look at those gunas. And there are 3 Sanskrit words that I often say could replace the DSM. The DSM becomes more and more of the diversity of the interaction of these gunas. And one of the things about it is that sattva is the intelligence that we're operating from. Rajas is that aspect of activity. And so there's nothing wrong with activity, but apart from if we direct it consistently towards the external solution and the future fix. So that externalization of the mind away from the core power of our own being becomes problematic. And then tamas, which is the lower one, it represents matter, but at a mental level, it represents a certain state of inertia and lethargy. And so it's a point where habits that we've relied on in a sense of a state of separation and survival and stress, they become locked down. So we become stuck in a rut of choosing the wrong behavior. So what's important to say about this is sometimes we say sattva is like the light, tamas is the darkness, and rajas is when we're kind of in a state of light on, light off. So sometimes we're clear and other times we're not so clear. There's a sort of darkness that descends, and these modes of mind are alternating all the time. So there's that aspect of we can be moving forward in certain areas of our life and have this areas of darkness and have this area of over-identification of ourselves with externals. So we keep coming back to like words that represent this in our lived experience. For sattva, we talk about responsiveness, the ability to respond to the present situation spontaneously for what that situation requires of us in this moment, which means that we have to be pretty centered in the self and know ourselves pretty well. With rajas, we tend to be into reactions. So that something happens and we're in a constant reaction mode. And you know, most of us can recognize that because we believe the problem lies somewhere outside of ourselves. And often the problem lies with the people around us or the situation, you know, jobs, where we live, money, the current situation with pandemics and all the climate and community chaos that we're in. Tamas is almost like the point where I've used up all my good energy trying to deal with this with these tools that I have. I haven't been able to find a solution. And so therefore I'm moving into a defensive or denial mode that I prefer to not even face it because it's easier for me to think it's not happening. Or I actually just resist the idea that it's got anything to do with me, that is kind of landed on my door by mistake and it's not mine. So the denial factor. So those 3 words, responsiveness, reaction, and resistance, is one of the ways that we can bring to an idea the mindset. And just to bring back what Eric was talking about, yoga is known for that philosophical point of view, but we also have the neurophysiological aspect, which is the physical practices that we bring in. So we really have to embody this as practice on an everyday basis to be able to face what's coming up in life. So it's a continual practice so that we're prepared for what does spontaneously arrive in our life. So I hope that somewhat gives us an idea of the gunas. I think one thing I want to say about the whole healing of addiction, and again, 3 words that we've used with the gunas, is that when the mind is more in tamas, you really need a form of strict supervision. So the person that's coming for help, you can't really leave them to their own devices. It doesn't work. So they'll naturally gravitate in a like spiraling downward back to old habits and behaviors pretty quickly. When more rajas is there, so then we're becoming like light on, light off. There's this idea of I'm kind of remembering what I'm here to do, and I want to get established in that, but still I need support. I need this support because I can't constantly remember. It's not taken with me. So really one of the things that we say is we need the company. So there's the illness and there's the wellness, and the wellness represents the group of people, the like-minded people, the satsanga that we hang with basically. And for sattva, then we have increasing ability to self-initiate self-care practices, spiritual practices. And so then we can more and more be left on our own. You know, we wouldn't choose to be on our own completely, because a big part of healing is community. So we would always want to show up and share what we have, because we can't really keep it unless we share it with others. So that part of it too, just this supervision, support, and self-initiation, that's an important factor along this timeline of healing.
Thank you, Durga. Thank you for bringing up community and practice. You both, brought up practice as an important component. And, we experience through the Vedic teachings that we need to detach ourselves from these earthly desires, these cravings, and the ego. And this can be achieved through that steady contemplative practice that both of you brought up in these mindfulness training programs. But given the intensity of our society, it feels like such a challenge to make space and time for emotional regulation. The pressures of the pandemic, people are really struggling to experience this pleasure or pursue nurturing activities that you both spoke of, essentially leading to depressive states. For some people, nothing feels good anymore. So for both of you, maybe we'll start with Eric. The senses play such an important part in the work that you do. Eric, through the importance of savoring natural beauty, and Durga through the broader, the use of the senses, including taste and touch. Can each of you elaborate on the role of the senses in healing? Maybe starting with you, Eric.
Yeah, I'd love to. And this is really an area that's been largely neglected in addiction science and in the science of mindfulness. We talk a lot about mindfulness-based techniques as focusing on developing a style of being with our present moment experience without attachment, and just noticing whatever arises. And I think that is the basis of good therapeutic work and healing in the treatment of addiction. But I think the process of recovery actually needs to go beyond that, to a place where we can actually start to remediate the reward deficits in the brain that are driving addictive behavior. So to do that in mindfulness-oriented recovery enhancement, we teach people how to savor natural, healthy pleasure, how to savor the beauty of the world around them. And that's exquisitely important, because we have to retrain the brain to learn how to extract a healthy sense of pleasure, meaning, and joy out of everyday life. So to do this, what we do is we teach people to use mindfulness to develop attentional stability and focus, and then to turn that mindfulness, to focus that mindfulness towards the pleasant everyday experiences that are all around us, the ones that we typically overlook because we're too busy, we're too stressed out, we're too lost in our smartphones, we're too distracted by social media, or we're distracted by the real tragedies and adversities that are confronting us on a day-to-day basis: the pandemic, political instability, racism, and trauma. So in the face of all of that mess, we need the attentional stability that mindfulness meditation can give us to reorient from this tragedy and to focus on the beauty in life, and to actually deeply encounter that beauty. And in doing so, this practice of savoring can actually become a path of self-transcendence. So when a person begins to savor the beauty of an object, let's say it's the beauty of a sunset, and you begin to notice the beautiful colors and the patterns of light and shadow, and in appreciating and absorbing the beauty of this moment, positive emotions begin to arise in the mind and the body. And sensing the contact between the senses and the object that one is savoring becomes a pathway of actually connecting with that experience. And then we're not just an isolated self observing the world from a distance, but actually we're intimately connected with that world through the senses. And then the boundary between the self and the world begins to fade. And in that moment, a sensation of bliss can arise, innate sensation of bliss, which is inherently rewarding. And that can become a wellspring that the person can draw upon as a way to get this natural reward, to make themselves feel good naturally on their own. So they don't need to be seeking it from a drug in order to get this sense of well-being, but rather from just appreciating the beauty of the world around us.
Durga, can you share the broader use of the senses in relation to the yoga recovery program?
Yes, I'll do my best for that. So the science of Ayurveda has us as a manifestation of the 5 elements. And what I love about that is that it is connecting us to the outside world. So we are the same manifestation as the nature around us, the trees, the grass, the plants, the rocks, the minerals. We hold that in a different way. So all of these 5 elements, and let me name them, from the most subtle is ether, the idea of space, and then air, the idea of movement, and fire, the idea of heat, light, and transformation, water, the idea of substance and flow, and then earth. So earth, the idea of the actual embodied intelligence and energy that we are. So here we are in a manifest body, and all of those 5 elements correlate back to 5 senses. So this was one of the real invitations for me to really come back into my body that had strongly disconnected from in a very self-destructive way, because I was unable to handle my own emotions or my purpose in life. So our 5 senses correlated to those 5 elements. Ether, space, relates to sound and hearing, and air relates to touch. Fire relates to sight. Water relates to taste, and earth relates to smell. So given that we are 5 element beings, we're 5 sense beings. Ayurveda has a 3-fold cause of disease. So yes, we have ignorance of our true nature. We have this habitual self-forgetfulness of our essential eternal nature. So what distracts us is the mind-body system. That is the manifestation of those 5 elements, and we operate through these 5 senses, and a separate sense of self, this ego process. And it is a process, it's not a thing in itself, it's a continuous lived process. So we have to find ways to loosen it. So the way that we move into dis-ease is we misuse our senses. And that's often under this mindset that says the leisure and the pleasure is somewhere outside of ourselves. So let's run towards that and get all that pleasure and run away from anything that looks like pain. So we call that in yoga and Ayurveda raga dvesha. So there's that natural desires that bring us out into the world. Hopefully at some point we'd feel satiated by that and turn inwards. I think one of the things that we have in our modern society is this like consumerism, capitalism. So they keep giving us more things to distract us. And we keep going back, trying to fulfill that need to experience satisfaction, contentment, satiation, and even bliss. But what yoga says is that you're moving in the wrong direction. So the rajas effect of the mind says it's out there, go find it, where the sattva effect says it's in here, get quiet, slow it down, pay attention, and then you can regulate your interaction between the external and the internal. But this is a process of training. So I loved how Eric talks about savoring, because when we really come down to deliver this as a practical exercise, we call it Life is Sweet, because really what we notice is we're always kind of trying to seek out the sweetness, the pleasure, the beauty of life. And there's only so much we can take in at a sense level. So we go from our natural inherent desires and needs, and that ramps up a little bit to greed, highly supported by our consumer culture, really hard to get away from with the advertising industry that makes us doubt our sense of self, me as being okay within myself, and really moving that towards a sense of self-loathing and even self-hatred, that we feel compelled to go out and find something to shore us up. And so there's this level of understanding from yoga that really is the whole medicine system. So it's embracing the embodiment that we are, whilst always wanting to keep us connected to the sense of what really is the evolutionary journey that we're on. So we can take pleasure in the senses, we can bring in constructive and creative pathways for the senses, like Eric's talking about with the savoring. And we also have to recognize that the satiation of the senses isn't actually the overall solution. So they kind of can, one way of moving into sense pleasure can beget more and more desires. And that's the kind of hooked thing that we're in our consumer culture, I believe. And it's proven problematic to a lot of people, because we do need to self-soothe. We find life stressful and it drains our energy, but we kind of don't know when to stop that. So our Life is Sweet goes across all those 5 senses and says, how can you sweeten your life through the sound, the touch, the sight, the taste? And I have to say, the taste staying away from the refined sugar or the high fructose corn syrup, which is a major problem for us. And that's why we call it Life is Sweet, because we're kind of always after the sweetness of life. And then through aromatherapy and smell. So that's the way we embody it. And at the same time as we do that, we also need to evolve, which the evolution means we have to turn to the more subtle aspect of our nature. So the pranic system, the vital life force, and also our spiritual natures, and offer time and space to the practices that lead to the evolution of who we are as embodied beings. So it's a lot. So it's good to encapsulate it.
Yeah. Did you want to say something, Eric?
Yeah, I just wanted
Please.
to build on that. So I think this distinction between sort of developing a never-ending hunger for the sweetness of life versus the process of evolution to be able to sense more and more refined, a more and more refined sense of satisfaction and reward and bliss in in the basic sense of existence, of being a conscious being, is a very important evolutionary arc. And I think we need to be aware that for example, in the process of savoring, we begin with the object. So our focus is on the external object, but the encounter with the object serves to stimulate the inner response of consciousness experiencing positive emotion and pleasure. And then as savoring deepens, then the practitioner actually turns attention inward upon the state of consciousness itself. So then the practice becomes savoring the inner bliss that arises, that was originally perhaps stimulated by the external world. But over time, the practitioner develops a more and more refined sense and ability to appreciate the sense of their own existence as a conscious being and the inherent bliss and pleasure that manifests. And so that gets, the levels of that type of savoring become really as deep as anything could go, to the point at which as the state deepens, and in a really compelling moment, awareness can savor itself. So the sense of just purely becoming aware of the sense of being alive in this moment is the greatest gift that we could ever experience. And so when you can learn to savor in such a refined way, then you don't need to seek something bigger and better. You don't need a million likes on your Facebook or your Twitter feed. You don't need a more and more powerful drug just to feel okay, because the simplest things become a portal into bliss. For example, the sensation of your body resting in the chair. I don't have to exert myself to stand up. I can just sit down and relax and release the body into the chair. Or the sensation of the breath moving into my nostrils that tells me I'm alive, that tells me I'm okay. So the basic sense of existence then can actually carry a signature of powerful reward and meaning. And I think that practice of turning mindfulness first upon the object, and then appreciating the arising of positive emotions and pleasant sensations, and then in a more refined way, turning consciousness back upon itself to appreciate the sense of existence. I think that actually can cause changes in the brain that are really quite important to the treatment of addiction. And we've shown this now in several data sets, that the capacity through meditation to achieve this deep absorption into the present moment manifested in what on the EEG shows up as theta oscillations in the midline of the brain is highly associated with the sense of self-transcendence, of going beyond the distinction between the subject and the object, and actually helps to alleviate opioid use and addiction. So I think being able to tap into these states, and I agree with Durga completely that we have to be careful that we're not just promoting sense hunger, but rather sense satisfaction, with the ultimate state being the satisficing of being alive in this moment, and teaching people how to appreciate that is a really important pathway to facilitating addiction recovery.
I love that you both brought up those states of simplicity. It leads me to think of this concept. It's one of my favorite words and phrases to use from West Africa, which is Sankofa, which literally means to go back and get it. And in practice, it's taking these traditions and these personal life experiences from our past and making positive change in actions through benevolent use of knowledge. And I think it's relatable to this conversation because it signifies the importance of future generations to look back and benefit from these gems of the past and just live more simply and more nurturing. And many of them are indigenous teachings, which are nature-based, which are heart-centered. And one of the symbols of Sankofa is the heart. So before we bring Jeffrey in his conversation, I just have one last question for both of you. Durga, you point out that yoga of recovery is about heartfulness as opposed to mindfulness. So can you elaborate what you mean by this?
Yes, and I will do it as briefly as I can. There's certain junction points within us from this receipt of being in this world and being sensate beings. So the seat of the vital life force is the heart. The seat of the first tissue, which is called rasa, which is it translates to pleasure. So the pleasure of being alive and embodied. The seat of that is the heart. And the seat of what we call ojas, which is like the immune system, that is also the heart. Now, the heart is connected to the brain, but in what yoga offers us a 3-body system. So we are body, mind, spirit. And it is acknowledged that on the body level, we are the 5 elements, and we're operating mostly on a chemical basis at that level. At the next level, which is the subtle body, so the mind, the intellect, the emotions, the sense of separate self, the ego, that operates more on a more profound, what is called an electrical force. And the electrical force of the heart, and this comes back to like heart rate variability, coherence research, is actually stronger than the brain. And we link that to prana practices. And then there's this aspect of the seed of who we are, the causal body. And they say that works on a magnetic basis. So what that means is we arrive in this philosophical system of yoga, we arrive with a certain amount of spiritual bank account and also some debts to pay. And we magnetize towards us the people and the situations that give us an opportunity to move through those lessons and help us realize really what our birthright is, what life is about, meaning and purpose. So one thing I do want to go back to with those senses is that the next step in yoga of recovery, as we teach people to embrace life as sweet and use self-soothing sense therapies to allow ourselves to feel like, okay, we can relax and take care of ourselves. The next step is life is love, because each taste has a physical as well as a psychological effect. So the psychological effect of the sweet taste is love and attachment. And where life is love takes us is into ritual. So instead of grasping for sense pleasure, ritual takes us out into nature and celebrates in ceremony the gifts of nature and the gifts of us in the circle. So we dance, we sing, and it's really a whole 5 sense therapy celebration. And I think that's a little bit of really, in truth, where healing, we've lost that piece. The marriage of the taking our mundane life, but really bringing it to the mystery that life is, and coming back to dancing and celebrating and finding a way to use every splendid thing, dress, music, to really experience that. And I think we know all of that as a child before any sense of intellect comes up in the evolution of the biochemical states of the body and the mind. Like kids know how to play, they know how to sing, they know how to dance, right, without any self-consciousness. And I'd like to see more of that. So as we're in a session right now in yoga of recovery, and we say we bring prayerfulness and playfulness to the aspect of healing. And I think we need that. So does that say something about the heart?
Yeah, no, it's great. I knew you were going to bring in the state of the child, the tabula rasa, that blank slate of a child, and the perfection of that childlike state. Eric, briefly, what is your approach, your perspective of heartfulness?
Well, it's funny that Durga mentioned heart rate variability, because I've done quite a lot of heart rate variability research, and in the same way that we've focused on savoring in mindfulness-oriented recovery enhancement as one of the many sets of techniques necessary to help addiction treatment. We found that after 8 weeks of training in mindfulness-oriented recovery enhancement, the heart actually becomes more responsive to natural, healthy pleasure. So we bring people into the lab and we show them images, photographs of smiling babies, beautiful sunsets, lovers holding hands. And following 8 weeks of treatment with mindfulness-oriented recovery enhancement, the patient's hearts become more responsive to the natural, healthy pleasure. Actually, their heart rate variability significantly increases. And what's been absolutely amazing is that the more the patient's hearts start to resonate, start to vibrate, if you will, with this feeling of love in viewing these naturally rewarding images, the greater the reduction in craving the patients experience, and the less they misuse drugs. So I think there's something to it that Durga is talking about. I think the resonance of the heart rate variability really is a way to quantify the resonance of the heart, the music, the rhythm of the heart, if you will. And actually, it's quite a sensitive measure to the changes that happen as a person transforms themselves on their path to addiction recovery. And since we're on the topic of music, and I know Jeffrey's coming in a minute,
Yes.
you know, the heart is a drum beat, right? There's a rhythm to it. And rhythm is quite important, not only in terms of heartbeat, but also in terms of the rhythm of the brain. And so one last little tidbit here that I think is really fascinating. I mentioned to you that mindfulness-oriented recovery enhancement increases these theta oscillations in the prefrontal cortex, which is linked with experiences of self-transcendence and reduced drug use. Well, the theta beat is actually the same rhythm that is in shamanic drumming in cultures all around the world.
Mm.
I think it's about 4 to 7 cycles a second, and it's that trance beat that shamans play on their drum. So the ancient wisdom that you were speaking of, Shankari, you know, coming back to us and speaking to us through modern neuroscience and the science of addiction recovery.
Yeah, thank you. I'd love to bring Jeffrey back to join us. Let me make sure he's up with us. So I'll give him a second to come on with us. There he is. So in addition to creating beautiful healing music, I think it's important for our audience to know that Jeffrey is a practitioner of the Alexander technique, which helps people be more aware of their bodies and move more effectively. So Jeffrey, what are some of your observations based on the conversation that we've just had? I know for you, senses, especially sound, can play such a major role in healing.
You know, it's first of all, I just want to thank Durga and Eric for their vast knowledge in their presentations, which are simply wonderful. And you know, I really appreciate learning from you both. You know, music is, to me, it's sort of the flip side of mindfulness. Certainly when I play, everything else is out of my mind. It's very single pointed, you know, and that's one of the great gifts of it. You're in the flow. And my hope is that listeners can be in that space too, that it can be a shared space, that when you listen to music, whatever that music may be, whatever is going to resonate for you in that moment, that everything else can drop away, which brings you back to yourself and really comes to what Eric was talking about in terms of savoring, that it can be a gateway to savoring and it can be a gateway to consciousness, you know, changing, that we understand that we can enjoy the music or we can be moved by the music. Certainly the heart opening is a big piece of what I think music is about. And so, you know, what I'm left with in thinking about the music in terms of this conversation is it's a vehicle, obviously, to bring us to the spaces that Eric and Durga are talking about in a very positive way, and in a way that can make externals a lot less necessary.
And that absorption that you talk about, that also the signature of deep cognitive absorption to the point where the mind has a single-minded focus and distraction falls away. When the mind achieves that state, the signature of that state is increased theta oscillation in the brain as the brain screens out distraction and consciousness becomes fused with the object. So I don't think any of this is a coincidence, and especially with music being such an amazing portal to experiencing bliss. I mean, I know it has been for me in my life. That's one of the greatest opportunities to savor that feeling of vibrating, you know, vibrating with love and light, as one of my favorite bands says. So yeah, and that is happening. I think it's not only happening in our psychological experience, but it's happening in our hearts and it's happening in the brain itself.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Sorry, it's also an opportunity to slow things down, and the sort of the anxiety of maybe kind of the pace of life can be removed, and we can come back to ourselves. Maybe our heart rates go down, maybe our brains function slightly differently. And so when we go back to things that would otherwise trigger, anxiety or difficulties for us, we have a different perspective on them. We can start to ground ourselves in the place that we get to when we're listening to music or when we're practicing mindfulness, however we do that. And so that's the hope anyway, that we can establish a different baseline.
Yeah, music and mindfulness are such complementary practices. And Jeffrey, you talk about using music and improvising as a way to be present in the moment. So I'll use a phrase from Tara Brach: how does attuning and befriending the everyday sounds and rhythms around us deepen our body awareness?
Well, I think that the attuning to the moment is a way, as I said, to eliminate a lot of our other thoughts, the noise. And when our mind becomes calm, we're more able to appreciate and observe what's really going on in our bodies. And I think when we're able to calm ourselves down, the body is able to relax in a different kind of way, and we're able to experience the difference between the body when we're running and we're not really paying attention to ourselves, and the body when we are at rest or we're calm and we're giving ourselves a chance to focus inwardly instead of outwardly.
Love that. Becomes that practice of cultivating self-awareness. I love that you brought up the flow too, from one musician to another. It's like being in the pocket, right? Being in tempo, being in that flow. I love that. So we have a few people that have raised their hands, I believe. We have time for 1 to 2 questions from our audience. So I'll give you, I think we have their hands raised. It's great. We're going to bring you up to speak your question. We're not going to see you, but we're going to allow you to talk. And let's have Kirby join us. Take a minute for you to join us here, Kirby.
Yeah, thank you. Takes me a minute to find the unmute button, and I'm so glad that you can't see me. I didn't prepare myself for presentation to the public today. I ended up typing into the chat a question/comment, and I directed it using the language I built my comment on the language that Eric has been using, but I would appreciate hearing from each of you on the topic. It basically is an expression of appreciation for how much Eric is emphasizing shifting salience attribution away from reward system activation on the part of a drug or any compulsive activity for that matter, toward a deeper, more profound capacity for absorption in the moment, to sensory experience especially. And I assume Eric probably would have, if he had time, gone on to talk about parasympathetic activation with the heart rate variability and so on. Anyway, having said that, I wanted to make a point that it's been my experience that an ongoing misperception of threat is the driver of compulsivity. So I wanted Eric and each of you to talk about how you help people move away from the misperception that they are under threat, of which, PTSD is just a common manifestation of that phenomenon. And unless you say all addiction is a subset of PTSD, which, by the way, I would agree with, I'd like you to address that, please. Thank you. I'm sorry I made such a speech of it.
Thank you,
No,
Kirby.
No, those are great comments. And thank you for raising the question, because it allows me to talk about some of the other pieces that I haven't mentioned to this point. So mindfulness-oriented recovery enhancement is not only about savoring, it's also about teaching people how to deal with emotional suffering. And a lot of that emotional suffering is stemming from, as you said, the perception of threat, the misperception of threat, or it could be an accurate perception of threat, but dealing with threat in the world. And of course, we live in many ways a dark world, and there's a lot of suffering out there in our communities. So we come back to the core mindfulness teaching, which is using attention and awareness to catch the mind in creating stories about life, and recognizing when the mind is generating negative stories laden with suffering and anguish, and then using the principles of mindfulness to suspend the story making, suspend the default mode, habitual negative core beliefs that we've developed from years of trauma and unhelpful learning experiences. And then once the negative automatic mental habit of construing the world as a dangerous place has been suspended and disrupted through the practice of mindfulness, then in mindfulness-oriented recovery enhancement, we teach people to engage in reappraisal, which is a sort of radical reframing of one's beliefs about reality. So we have the understanding that we are the author of the stories of our life, and therefore we have the power to redecide, to choose again what we really want to believe about ourselves and our lives, and to access an expanded set of information from the world around us, rather than being hyper-focused on only the negative and awful parts of our life, but actually to appreciate our life more broadly in all of its complexity, appreciating the pleasure and the pain, and doing so, having a more balanced appraisal of the situation that's confronting us, and realizing that we do have the strength to navigate our life's difficulties, and that facing those difficulties can actually make us a stronger person. So that mindful reappraisal process, as we call it, is an essential step in the healing process. And it's actually an initial stage that leads to savoring, because we can't just immediately, for those of us who are suffering from PTSD or depression, it may be really difficult for us to access the beauty in the world around us, because it's clouded, it's obscured by these negative beliefs and schemas, and it's being ignored because of the misperception of threat in the environment, as you pointed out. So first, using contemplative practices like mindfulness training to strengthen the mind, to strengthen awareness of when the mind is falling into negative mental habits, and then to disrupt those negative mental habits, to allow the mind and awareness to expand, to consider alternative perspectives of our life and develop a more empowering life story. That's the approach that leads people out of the darkness, if you will, and then gives them the ability to then turn towards the beauty in life and savor it more deeply.
I love that. You're getting some thumbs up from the audience. I'm going to ask Anne to unmute and come on for a question if they're still available. And if not, we can go to the next person. Okay, we're going to go to, and I'm sorry if I'm saying your name incorrectly, Yang. I'm going to allow you to talk if you're still interested in asking your question live. And please correct me if I said that wrong.
Hi, Shankri.
Hi.
My name is Qiang. Yeah, I understand it is extremely difficult to pronounce.
Thank you for correcting me.
No worries at all. I have several questions for Dr. Eric Garland. I'm a doctoral student in counseling psychology and study mechanisms of action underlying the effects of mindfulness-based intervention. So I'm really interested in the several topics mentioned by Dr. Garland. I'm wondering, does self-transcendence play a unique role in the effect of more when controlling for the effect of savoring and reappraisal? Yeah, I'm very interested in this construct. I'm just wondering if it has a unique effect in terms of the effect of more.
It's a great question. And I think my short answer is we need to study that more thoroughly, and to control for these various mechanistic pathways to understand what is the differential effect, the independent effect of self-transcendence above and beyond the other therapeutic mechanisms of more, of which there are many, from disrupting habitual addictive automaticity, changing attentional bias towards drugs, reducing negative emotions, and then increasing positive emotions and natural reward through savoring, as well as self-transcendence. So all of these pathways need to be disentangled from one another. So I think you raise a great point. The only work that we've done in that regard is in a paper I published in 2019 in the Journal of Consulting and Clinical Psychology. We looked at the effects of more on positive psychological functions broadly construed, so positive emotions, savoring, meaning in life, and self-transcendence. And of these factors, all of these factors together were responsible for explaining some of the effects of more on alleviating pain. But the strongest of the four factors, the factor that predicted the greatest degree of pain relief, was self-transcendence. So that's one attempt to unpack the differential effects of these mechanisms, but we need to do a lot more research in that regard, and that's something that I will be doing now that this really large trial of mindfulness-oriented recovery enhancement just finished. We now have the mechanistic data to really understand what is the differential impact of these different therapeutic mechanisms of more on reducing addictive behavior. A great question. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question that came in. Maybe I can direct this one to Durga. Can you share how your approaches help deal with the shame that can come with addictive behaviors?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Deep question. I think one of the things I like to talk about here, just to place this, that we are looking to the sense of self. So our sense of self at these different manifest levels, like our source, our spirit self, our mind emotion, separate sense of self, and then the actual embodied sense of self. So from that philosophical perspective, we offer the idea that at the most core level of our essential being, which is what yoga calls our Satchi Ananda, our really true sense of self, there is no taint, there is no stain from all these activities of life. So there is always a place that is beyond all this trouble, all this suffering. And ultimately, that's what self-realization invites us to. Really, another thing that I like to think about is, as we have this lived experience, it's always good to make the distinction that there is that sense of guilt, which is something that we feel over something that we've done. We've done something wrong and we have a sense of guilt about it. But when it deepens into that sense of shame, it's not about doing something wrong, it's about being wrong in ourselves. So that philosophical invitation to understand ourselves at that much deeper level is an invitation to deal with the shame. But also what we understand is that the shame mindset is down there in the tamas effect on the mind. It's deeply veiled. So again, this is the part of the mind where I talked about this person needs a lot of, like, sometimes I call it strict supervision, but what they really need is a lot of light from another. So we call this satsanga. So we bring the person into other people who can recognize the light in them and help really birth the gift that they are. So really remembering their true nature. And really in a healing community, we see ourselves as a gift economy. So we all come to this circle, and from these life experiences and the progressive resolution of resolving them, we have a story to tell. That story offers a way to guide other people that have been in that same situation. So sattva is the light, and satsanga is the company of the wise, the company of the people who shine their light to help others. And I have to say that one of the ways that we do not heal is punitive measures. So there's an opposite of satsanga, which is kusanga or dusanga, which is to put people with also clouded and veiled minds, so they're not helping each other at all, which is what we've been doing with the criminal justice system and offering punitive measures instead of therapeutic response to these addictive problems. So shame can be, the veils can be lifted, and that is lifting towards who we truly are, but it takes help and it takes a continuous support of people within the circle of healing. It takes time.
Thank you so much. So that is all the time we have for our questions from our audience, but I think we have time to just ask one closing question of each of you. It's been such a great conversation. I wish we had more time to do this. We always wish we had more time to keep these episodes going. And maybe I can start with you, Jeffrey. What's one action step or insight or that members of our audience can take from this conversation, or action steps to support those struggling with addictive behaviors, people that have struggled through the pandemic? What's something that people can take from this conversation today and carry through into their daily lives?
Thank you for the question. Obviously coming from the standpoint of music and someone who creates and is lucky enough to live in kind of musical meditation, I would encourage people to listen to music and give themselves a chance to settle. As I listened to all the answers to all the previous questions, it became clear to me that music is not only about savoring, it's very often about recognizing the struggle and recognizing the pain. And so if we listen to music that gives us a chance to hear the suffering, and then also a chance to kind of recognize that outside ourselves, and then a chance to maybe bring ourselves back to a place where we can heal inside. That's, it's a great tool, and it's a great way, I think. So I would just encourage people to find the music that resonates in that way for themselves, and try to come back to themselves in a new and different way.
Durga, same question for you.
Okay, so the quickest thing I offer from yoga recovery is feel the difference between the illness and the wellness, which is really just the I and the we. So the best thing to do as an immediate action is ask for help, or admit that you're feeling a particular way, which is pick up the phone and find someone to talk to, and just create, leave behind that separation and isolation and come into a conversation with another and give voice to the way that you're feeling. Because, really a problem shared is a problem halved, and that will open. So again, we're using our voice to express how we feel.
Thank you. Eric, some tips, action steps that we can share with our viewers today?
Yeah, I think it's really important to recognize that even though addiction manifests in part in the brain is not fixed. It's malleable. The brain is plastic. Neurons can change connections. The brain can reorganize itself. The brain can actually grow and heal like every other organ in the body. And so you should have hope as somebody who is recovering from addiction, that you can actually heal yourself and transform and transcend this condition. And so one way to do it is as we've been talking about, the approach in mindfulness-oriented recovery enhancement, is to teach yourself through the use of mindfulness and savoring to reclaim a sense of natural, healthy pleasure, joy, and meaning from the everyday world around you. And if the more you can do that, the more you can extract a sense of healthy pleasure from the world around you, the less of a pull you're going to feel from the drugs, and the greater the chance you're going to give your brain to reorganize and grow, and you can transform yourself. So I really do believe that, and I think modern science, the science of neuroplasticity, tells us that this is indeed the case. So have hope.
Thank you all. Once more, all three of you, thanks so much. And I know our audience really, really appreciated this conversation. We had close to 800 people register for this program today. So you just helped change a lot of lives. So thank you so much. I'd love to offer just a short recap of this amazing conversation that we had today. From Eric, we learned how we can use savoring to appreciate the beauty in life, and how through mindfulness, we can cultivate states of transcendence that allow us to get over our limited egos with the potential to reverse the process of addiction. Durga taught us that if we move into disease through misuse of the senses, and how to nurture well-being from the inside out. She spoke to the importance of play and joy, and how to nurture the notion that life is sweet. From all three of our speakers, we learned about the importance of healing from the heart and seeking out states of calm and flow and listening to music. You know, Jeffrey said, listen to music. It gives us the chance to heal suffering and bring ourselves back to a place of healing. So thank you for all of that. It was so wonderful. And before we move into a brief guided meditation with Durga, followed by a closing musical offering from Jeffrey, I'm gonna just give two quick announcements about our upcoming programs. On December 7th, we're gonna be hosting a Mind and Life conversation with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, Alyssa Epple, Michelle Shioda, and John Dunn on embracing hope, courage, and compassion in times of crisis. And we're going to be gathering together again for Inspiring Minds in the new year to have an in-depth conversation with Alyssa Epple and Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche on moving from climate distress to climate action. And that's going to be on January 12th. And registration is now open for both of those events through the Mind and Life website. So again, thank you all for joining us, and always deep bows of appreciation to our Mind and Life team that works behind the scenes to keep all of our online programs just right in the pocket, as we heard from Jeffrey, and flowing so effortlessly. And we hope that you all continue to stay connected to Mind and Life as we move forward in the coming new year. We couldn't do this without the support of our community. Durga, I'm going to hand it over to you to lead us in a guided meditation closing.
Thank you so much, Shankari. So let's just take a moment, sitting, feeling the weight of the body as you sit, allowing your eyes to be open or closed, and allow your mind's attention to come to the nose, feeling the air enter through the nostrils, the lightness of the air, and the weight of the body, holding those two sensations together simultaneously. Then allow your attention to rest in the sensation in the mouth, water governing the sense of taste, become aware of the sensation of moisture in the mouth and the flow of liquids and water within the body, the lymph, the plasma, the blood circulating in this aliveness of a substantial body, 60% water. Inhale and bring the sensation of light and darkness that are around the eyes, the eyes representing the element of fire. So if your eyes are closed, you may notice the darkness, but even within that darkness, there is some light. If we open our eyes briefly, we welcome the light, and by closing the eyelids, we come to the darkness again. So again, the potential of light and dark in this sensate being, the principle of fire governing the sense of sight. And as you're sitting here, be aware of the sensation of touch, the touch of air on your skin, the touch of the fabric of your clothing against your skin. The skin as the sense organ of the air element in touch with the world around you. The hands as the motor organ of that element. So as you sit here, draw your hands together at your heart center and allow the fingertips to lightly touch, keeping the palms separate. Now take an inhalation and draw the palms together and feel some pressure, one hand pressing into the other hand. And then as you exhale, release and just lightly allow the fingertips to touch again. Inhale, bring the palms together, feeling the pressure. And exhale, release the sense of touch, which we connect with mostly through the skin and the hands. And then raising those hands up, just gently allow your hands to cup around your face and allow a finger to touch onto your ears, as if you're trying to block off the sound. And as you block off the external sound, become aware of the space around you and the space within you and the actual sound of the breath. So really tune into the sound of your own inhalation and the exhalation. If you like, as you exhale, you can allow a gentle humming sound so that you really feel into the full vibration of the sound within the space within you and around you. Release the hands back to the heart center, recognizing all five elements, all five senses. And in this felt sensation of being alive, welcoming the music from Jeffrey. Namaste.